Hello there, people and listeners of the Hungry Podcast. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome my very good friend and now business partner, Harry Clarke, back onto the podcast. Harry was the founder of Pops, who did these premium frozen ice lollies. Did some amazing brand partnerships with Diageo, Pimm's, loads of amazing brands. And they got that into Tesco, Sainsbury's, Ocado. They unfortunately had to fold the business, which we talked about on our first podcast, which went down really, really well. And we talked a lot about the pain points of actually being a founder, what it feels like to shut down your baby, to kill your baby, as Stephen King says. And today, what we want to talk about is drinks specifically. And I think drinks is a category that is so wildly different to every other category in that I almost say it's like the Matrix category. So by that, I mean, the opportunity in drinks is just way, way, way bigger than any other category. Like, I've worked in peanut butter. There's only so many kind of channels and occasions you can go with peanut butter. Same with, drinking chocolate. But with drinks, it's like the world is literally your oyster. And if it is the Matrix, you can literally bend the rules. I think of TRIP. TRIP are a functional CBD brand who, and I spoke to Liv on the podcast, who have literally, as I said, kind of taken the fucking red pill or the blue pill and done some weird shit. They are in the co-op meal deal, but they are in Annabelle's private members club. They are a drink that you'll have post yoga. They are a drink you'll have in the middle of the day to calm down. They're a drink you'll have after you miss a tube. They're a drink you'll have, as I say, in a private members club in Soho. And I think drinks is so fascinating, but ultimately there's a lot of competitors come crawling in. It's very packed to the rafters. And I think, Harry, what I love you, mate, is you've done so much with drinks, with your agency. And I'm excited today to kind of, just weave in and explore how this kind of majestical Matrix-esque world of drinks works. So thanks for coming on again, buddy. I really appreciate it.
No problem. And thanks. Great to be back.
So let's start with some of the kind of common mishaps or mistakes drinks brands make. I think because there's low barriers, like everyone sees a drinks category, they see the upside and they think, right, we're going to launch a drinks brand. How hard can it be? And ultimately, you look at the fixture of a meal deal, it is so the shelf space is so finite. You've got the big incumbent brands, the Coca-Colas. I think in terms of challenger brands, some of the only ones that have really kind of pushed through are maybe Dalston's, Corson Press. What would you say are the biggest kind of unforeseen challenges early stage drinks founders don't understand before they go into the market, if that makes sense?
I think look, in terms of the category where there's just so much innovation, the drinks category will be the leader in that. And I think now we're sort of in a world where essentially better for you beverages, which we see a lot of now, is that it's almost it's become so prominent that almost functional and better, when I say better for you beverages, I sort of mean most innovation that we see that comes into market now is not going to be high in sugar. It's not going to have artificial ingredients. There's going to be something there that is on a healthier sort of angle. This doesn't necessarily mean that they've got to be just a health proposition, but they probably toe the line in terms of what we consider healthy. I think what I see from founders is I think there's just this sort of I don't want to say unrealistic, but I think people believe the volume that they'll see immediately is a lot greater than the reality. So I think I think if brands were, if founders were a bit more sort of aware about sort of the time it might take to build that sort of distribution and rate of sale, I think there might be, I think in terms of like, I suppose, the appetite to get involved in the space might be different, because the reality is sometimes different to, their expectations are slightly different to the reality. And I think because people see that, within the drink space, there are just so many different channels that you can attack. You can pick up a drink anywhere, whether that's at the service station, whether that's on a plane, whether that's just in your sort of supermarket, wherever that is, your local gym. So I think they believe that sort of opportunity in terms of how quickly they can scale might be slightly quicker than the reality.
Mm. And then because there's so many channels, I always talk, like, one of the things I say you line up all your channels and imagine you're digging for oil, right? Ideally, you want to go narrow and deep on one or two channels, because that's where you're going to find the oil, and that's where you're going to build the volume, build the rate of sale. I think what can happen with drinks brands is they think, fucking hell, I've got all these different potential oil wells or oil kind of holes to mine and dig, is that they become a wandering generalist instead of a meaningful specific, as per Seth Godin. And they end up with this scattergun approach, being like, right, I'm going to do a bit of airlines, I'm going to do a bit of grocery, I'm going to get it into gyms, I'm going to get it into some independents, and then before you know it, like, you're a sales team of basically one, i.e. the founder, and you spread yourself super thin. Say I'm a drinks brand and I've created, I don't know, Popey's Pop.
Yeah.
Sounds a bit naff, but and I'm starting out. So I've just said to the manufacturer, I've got Popey's Pop. I've got a huge minimum order quantity that I've just paid for. It's all sat in a 3PL.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing what you know, what is the easiest lever or easiest pedal to push to begin to get that rate of sale going? Like, what is the hole or the channel you want to go narrow and deep on to drive that? Is it out of home? Is it grocery? Like, where would you be playing?
Well, I think the great things about the drink spaces, in terms of you've got two things on your side immediately. Is you've got usually you've got shelf life, unless it's a sort of fresh juice. You've usually got shelf life which might be anything from 6 months up to 24 months, especially for a sort of carbonated drink. So you've got that sort of when you're investing in product, you've got some time to sell it. Having said that, just to caveat that, which I think lots of founders are surprised about immediately, is that when you're selling a drinks into a wholesaler or to a grocer, they tend to want about 75% minimum life of requirement on delivery. So although you might have a 12-month shelf life on production, you've got to be getting that into your customer within the first 3 to 4 months, or depending on what you can negotiate. So I think there's a misconception there immediately, and I've seen lots of founders go, "Oh my goodness, like, we've just produced all this, and we've got to shift it into these channels," and actually not 12 months like we thought. We've actually got to shift it in there within 3 months. So I think there's often a misconception because no one really tells you that, I suppose. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So essentially, when you're dealing with any trade customer, so any, I suppose, selling to a business to business, so whether that going to a wholesaler, whether that going to a grocer, anywhere that's supplying the trade, you're going to have that minimum life of requirement on as a sort of stipulation.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Honestly, means the absolute world to me. I'd be so grateful for a small favor, please. It is so hard growing a YouTube channel. It is so bloody hard. If you please enjoy these videos, just click the subscribe button. More subscribers equals bigger guests equals better conversations, and hopefully you can learn more as you build your food and drink brand. Thank you so much.
In terms of distribution, what you do have with the drink, which is a fantastic opportunity, is you can sell direct to consumer, and platforms like your website, platforms like Amazon give you an immediate sort of distribution opportunity. That if you're in a shorter, fresh, if you're in the food category, if you're within anything that's fresh, that becomes obviously a lot more difficult. And I think what we're also seeing is that, the direct to consumer side of the business, and just as a bit of a caveat, I work with my sort of clients more on the sort of retail business to business side of things, but you can build some very you can build big businesses now in terms of direct to consumer. I've heard some very impressive stats that I won't quote from brands such as Dash and Trips and other brands in that ilk that are doing these phenomenal numbers online. And I think one of the reasons for that is, drinks is now a category where consumers are pretty well conditioned in buying online. Buying in 12 packs deliveries to your home is a very sort of common distribution method now, and that really wasn't the case. I would say 5-10 years ago, it's suddenly sort of soft drinks, health drinks were not sort of consumed in the way. So that again gives that gives founders an opportunity to sort of get get off the ground relatively quickly.
So I've got Popey's Pops. You're saying D2C is an oil well we should explore because you've got complete, again, that's a riddle wrapped in an enigma for sure, because I know D2C is not as easy as just shotting it online. Sure. But let's just say, right, we're going to focus on D2C. You could bring in someone to help with that, or you can kind of figure out yourself. I mean, everyone tells me about these Facebook Meta adverts. I'm just like, this is just mind-boggling. But anyway, for argument's sake, so D2C. Then you've got grocery. You've got out of home. Yep. Hortica, what the fuck it's called?
Horeca.
Yeah. To say it. Horeca. So then you've got some other oil wells you could explore. Again, knowing what you know, where should I be spending my limited, finite resource with Popey's Pops?
Yeah, it's obviously all sort of slightly, it's product dependent, right? And it's got to be where you can see a gap in or you can see more of a gap, because I think one areas of drinks there isn't a lot of white space in terms of in terms of new innovation. There is innovation coming in the market, but there tends to be very quickly a lot of brands sort of repeating that innovation. So I think in terms of other channels, it is very sort of specific to sort of your brand, what in terms of what, I suppose the channel plan has to be very much specific, so, I suppose an example of this is, lots of, I've seen lots of brands who have done it, who've started in the business and industry sector, let's just say, and, they've gone, we've got a product here, we're going to build our sort of core following in business and industry and supplying into lots of the offices, because, again, you've got lots of repeat purchase opportunities there. Often these offices might be in central London. You've got sort of a captive audience there. So I think, what we're basically saying here is, as a startup, certainly not a strategy is this sort of scattergun approach. You need to very much be looking at sort of looking at your sort of your product and your proposition and go, okay, well, let's look at where that sort of gap is in the market for us. And I'd be picking one or two channels and sort of focusing on those as much as I can.
Yeah. So going narrow and deep.
Yeah.
I talk about the Piper's example all the time, and I really believe every brand can find a slipstream channel. Mm-hmm. So it's a channel where no one else is really looking. It's kind of like stumbling upon that oil well. I don't keep talking about oil. It sound like some fucking Machiavellian masochist here. But I think there's always a channel. The biggest example is Piper's Crisps, right? So every crisps brand was knocking on the door of Waitrose going, please give me a listing. Please give me a listing. What they did is they were like, right, screw this. Where's no one playing? Farm shops and delis or specialty. Let's absolutely hammer it there. Mm-hmm. And that's what they did. They built a huge multi-million pound business in farm shops, delis, had a huge customer base there. Mm-hmm. That then when they crossed the chasm into retail, people already knew who they were. If anything, the supermarkets were coming to them saying, oh my God, look what you're doing in specialty. We'd love to buy you. And I think, with Islands Chocolate, Wilf and the guys, they stumbled across, didn't stumble across, they started as a brand that was selling bars of chocolate, and then they ended up finding this kind of unique channel in all these high-end Michelin star restaurants. And by doing that, they've then unlocked this whole delta of opportunity with Gales, fill in the blank coffee shops, and that is what I would call a slipstream channel. In terms of drinks, and again, I know all of this is case by case specific, and let's just say Popey's Pops is a functional drink. Like, everyone's functional drinks are all the rage right now.
Yeah.
Knowing what you know, again, what would you say are some of those potential, we've got our D2C, we've got our B&I, business and industry. What would you say are some of those spooky, in the murky waters, lying opportunities?
Looking at just the specific channels, I think it's also about the audience that you want to be targeting as well, because we have a brand in the portfolio called Savile Beverage Company, which is a very sort of premium alcohol-free RTD, and we've been trading for the last sort of 3 years, and we've been really focused on the out of home channels, and what we've done here, and this is maybe a sort of good example of how brands should be thinking, is we're in this space where we're in the alcohol-free category, so the low to no category. Within that category, spirits have been a sort of domination within that. So brands like Seedlip that come in sort of 70 cl spirit bottles, and we've come along as an alternative in a 250 ml can. So then when we start to look at the out of home channel, we start to do is go, okay, we don't have that many like for like competitors within the low to no RTD space. So these are 250 ml can cocktails, but we do have quite a lot of competitors that are trying to explore the out of home, specifically the sort of on trade, so like bars, restaurants, stadiums, sort of large events. But essentially how we look at it is we start to look at, okay, so what are the operational challenges of trading with a alcohol-free spirit? So and by the way, I'm not here to sort of say anything bad about alcohol-free spirits, but I can just take a sort of honest and open observation. The alcohol-free spirits, in a environment like let's choose an account. So Chelsea Football Stadium, for instance, which is one of the Compass sites, they need to have an alcohol-free option. But on the bar, they have staff that are being paid £10 an hour. They don't necessarily know how to mix an alcohol-free spirit. So therefore, what our sales pitch, how we go and attack that situation is say, okay, we're ready to serve. Therefore, we can provide a product that's operationally consistent. There's the speed of service is much quicker because there's less ingredients. You just open the can and serve. So what we try and do is we try and look at the pain points from the operators. So we pick a channel and we go, these are the pain points that these operators are having. And that can be, in that category, can be replicated, that sort of strategy, in lots of different areas. So whether we're, we've got a listing on British Airways because they don't necessarily want to be mixing too many drinks there. It's an easier serve. We're doing quite a lot on cruise ships. Again, we're doing quite a lot in offices in that category because, again, an office, they don't necessarily they don't have all the facilities to make a alcohol-free cocktail. So with lots of this, and I hope that's sort of an interesting example, because what we're trying to do is also look at where the pain points are from the customer and go, okay, well, how can we sort of address that for them? And I think that's sort of what we've done. One thing that I would say that would sort of counter that is, we are, with Savile Beverage Co., we are an alcohol-free cocktail. It's an RTD, and RTDs are not necessarily widely adopted in very sort of premium outlets. So, they can be, but not all the time. So, for instance, we've learned with that brand that we do not win in 5-star hotels because, in 5-star hotels and looking at that sort of luxury hotel sector, they will always want to use a spirit. an alcohol-free spirit, and they'll also want to mix that drink, using it. And actually, psychologically, when you're in a 5-star hotel, even if your drink takes 5-7 minutes to come out, you don't care actually. And sometimes sometimes it's a positive, because you're thinking they're taking such care over my cocktail and the craft of it, that you're sort of sitting there and you're sitting in a lovely cocktail bar. There's an ambience. You've got some delicious nuts, some olives. It's all part of the experience. So when looking at that channel strategy, it's not necessarily just looking about okay, well, where's the gap in my exact category and for the like-for-likes. It's also zoning in on what are the pain points and operational issues that some of these end customers are having, and how can I kind of come in and solve them?
I love that. It's all the original question was, how do you find that slipstream, or how do you find the oil well with lots of gold or oil where no one else is looking? And I think if you focus on the operational pain point and really dig into that, that will be the compass to find that oil well. Where, and as you say, the delicious example of Savile is, it's like, okay, well, in a cocktail bar, if I went to the Ritz and some guy just poured a can and in a thing and said, "There you go, mate," imagine I was on a date, I'd be like, "Oh, thanks a lot, fucking hell." That's an arm and a leg, 18 quid.
Yeah.
But then, as you say, you go to Chelsea Football Club, it's like, well, time's of the essence. People are on £10 an hour. You need speed of service. And I think that's really useful for listeners, is instead of really zoning in and saying, what is the operational pain point? And that will lead you to that's the compass to the beautiful oil well down the road. How do our listeners develop instead of all the bells and whistles, how do they dive into the operational pain point mindset to unlock that new channel?
Yeah. So I think you've just got to put your shoe on the other foot, right? So I think, again, this goes back to what I often see with early stage businesses. It's brand all the time. And I think it will be maybe because grocery is such a different, sort of a different beast, and sort of how you look at it. Maybe we just focus on the out of home, because within the out of home, there's obviously a lot of different nuances to that. And if for people that just to be sort of very clear on sort of what out of home is, how I define out of home is anywhere where you will basically be consuming a product outside of your house, just to sort of be clear. So that sort of opens up sort of every sort of huge amount of channels. So I think, and you don't need to be an expert in this. I think what you've just got to be doing is thinking about what the dynamics of those channels are going to be. So if you're thinking that you are, let's say, let's focus on, let's say, the business and industry channel. So let's say you're a contract caterer and you're buying in drinks for an office. Your mindset is thinking specifically around the needs of your customers, who are basically the workers who are working in that environment. What do they want between their hours of work? So that's the way that you've got to then think about it, and then go and also in certain of these out of home channels, these buyers are buying multiple different products, and they're not going to be necessarily so laser focused on the category. So in the likes of a grocery category, that grocery buyer is buying, if they're buying, in the world of drinks, they're the soft drinks buyer. They're going to know every single data point with it, or they should know most data points in that, what's driving the category, what's driving the growth. If, let's say, you're in an environment where you're speaking to a contract caterer that's buying food and drink for an office, that their insights in terms of the sort of category are going to be completely different. It's going to be a completely different sort of touch point. So I think what you've got to do is sort of you've got to then obviously amend your pitch slightly depending on obviously what category you're going into, but then understand. So if I was going to give an example, if I was sort of pitching into an office, obviously what are offices now? Again, offices are looking at lots of different, the larger offices, lots of them have, sustainability agendas. Therefore, they're looking at putting less plastic in their offices. Hence we've seen some really good sort of water brands, that are in aluminium cans do really well in those office spaces. We've seen, functional beverages do quite well in offices, but actually I would actually say sort of the more functional actually, in terms of that sort of consumer, depending on the office, Facebook and Twitter might have a sort of audience where, they're far more up to date on trends. Therefore, something more functional might be suited for them. Wherefore, maybe a more traditional office it might not be, and therefore maybe a Corsten Press might be, which is a sort of very delicious, healthier soft drink, but it's not a kombucha. So you start to have a think around, firstly what the sort of operators are sort of where their pain points are, and then you sort of just start to tap into that consumer piece as well, and sort of go think, okay, who are what's in terms of sort of the employee base, what that business stands for, and then you sort of tailor your pitch that way.
Delighted to announce the extension of our partnership with the wonderful Billy and Paul from Mackenzie Jones, but even more exciting, they have just launched a brand new brand as part of Mackenzie Jones called MKJ Ignite. MKJ Ignite is a recruitment firm which specialises full shebang, focus entirely on challenge brand space. They work with some incredible brands: Lucky Saint, Good Rays, Purdy and Fig, Hunter and Gather, and Real Superfoods. They can support with your hiring needs across all levels, top to bottom, junior entry-level jobs, all the way through up to MD and CEO level. So if you're looking for a field sales stomper, a sales wizard, an ops guru, a supply chain sensei, you name it, MKJ Ignite can help you out. And look, if you're looking to wet your whistle, ignite your curiosity, then check out the poddy we recorded with them back in July, laden with wisdom, all about like do's and don'ts of hiring and like how to create the perfect job description. You will love it. Guys, are you ready? There is gonna be some absolutely, totally, brilliantly bonkers next level madness coming your way today. Are you ready to take your brand to a whole new stratosphere for free? Imagine connecting your product to a digital world through a simple smartphone scan. You know the drill, scan it, bish bash bosh, you're away. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the magic of the new GS1 powered QR codes. These next generation barcodes act as a gateway to a world of endless possibilities. They connect your product's unique identity to multiple online sources of enriched real-time content. Why on planet Earth should you be getting your mitts on these GS1 powered QR codes? Well, look, very, very simple, mate. GS1 will help you drive revenue, upsell and cross-sell your amazing products, boost your bottom line. Yes, please. Where do I sign? Enhance customer engagement. Look, delight your customers with dynamic content that captivates and keeps them coming back for more. Please, sir, can I have some more? Yes, you can. Comply with regulations. Look, you want to be building your brand. You don't want to be knee-deep, wading through a deep river of legislation, aggravation. These barcodes allow you to stay ahead of the curve. Look, don't allow this beautiful boat of boundless opportunity to sail away into the molting sunset. Be on that boat. Join GS1's UK's free pilot program today. Yes, it's completely free. There will be a link in the show notes. Thank you so much. Yeah, I love that. So it's case by case, almost doing the research beforehand, saying, so probably PwC, I remember doing a sampling session there. It was riveting, but that's going to be a very different vibe to Google, where we did a thing at Google, and it was like, as you can expect, it was super, super fun. And I think tapping into that operational problem first,
yep,
and then actually the mindset and the context of the office. The context of the office is super interesting. That's very valuable. You said earlier there's a lot of nuance to out of home, which is really interesting. Grocery kind of, it's not as easy as this bish bash bosh, Bob's your uncle, but you get the listing, they put you in the stores, you do the media plan, and then you go and sample like crazy, and it's either sink or swim. But with out of home, it's such a incongruous, perplexing beast. What are some of the nuances you wish you knew when you started your career in FMCG 10 years ago?
Well, I think in terms of the expectation of again, the different routes to market in out of home massive differently, and there is a
How?
there is
How?
yeah. So I'll explain. You have you in terms of out of home, generally you're not always delivering direct into them, so you've got to work often with a wholesaler. So you've got sort of wholesaler relationships. You also have within those wholesalers, they have relationships with contract caterers, and I think there might sometimes be I've seen in startups often founders or commercial teams can be slightly sort of confused about sort of the difference between sort of a wholesaler and a contract caterer and the food service provider. So you've sort of got three different sort of terms there. But again,
what's the difference between each?
Yeah, so in terms of a wholesaler, so a typical sort of wholesaler will be, they will be buying X amount of your product. You'll be selling it at a wholesale price, which will be a discount on your direct price. And then essentially they will be basically selling into the customer for you. So the relationship that it streamlines your process, because rather than delivering directly into 50 accounts, you having to raise invoices for every single one of them, you've got to facilitate the delivery and pay for that cost. It's all being centralized through a wholesaler. Therefore, they will order X amount of cases. You will have a minimum. You'll have a MOQ, which will go in, and then it'll essentially be driven out to all the end customers. Obviously, which lots of people then, there's a disconnect between brand thinking when you land a wholesaler that is going to mean automatic volume. That's never normally the case. There's a lot of work that has to go into driving the end customers. So working collaboratively with that wholesaler is going to be key to drive that sort of end result in terms of getting your distribution out. But it's a chicken and egg often in terms of you need that wholesaler in place to win the end customer. So that's the wholesaler, which I think that the wholesaler approach is obviously works in retail. So you have retail wholesalers that will supply into all the sort of typical indies. You also have wholesalers that deliver into retail, and they also cover into out of home as well, because essentially all these retailers are looking to extend their customer base anyway. So it's sort of the model still works. So that's the sort of the sort of wholesale relationship. And again, what I've seen a lot of is seeing brands who, recently had a meeting with a very small brand who had 9 wholesalers, and it gets you thinking, that's a hell of a lot of wholesalers for a very small business to handle. How much revenue is really being driven out of that wholesaler? The answer, very little. But the reality is, when working with these wholesalers, you've got to invest into brochure adverts. You've got to often invest into telesales. You've got to invest. There's minimum hurdle rates. So having a whole load of wholesalers is certainly not a sort of. Although that means you might have very good availability in the market, it doesn't mean it's going to drive particularly a huge amount of end sales. So I think there's definitely a sort of you need to be quite strategic about what wholesalers you work with, and trying to also be aware of who their end customers are, and actually being aware that lots of these wholesalers deliver into lots of the same customers. So actually, there's a lot of sort of overlap and cannibalization really between it. So you just got to think strategically there. In terms of your question around the contract caterers, the contract caterers, essentially the easiest way to sort of define what a contract caterer is. These are organizations like Compass Group, CH&Co, Elior. You've probably heard of some of these sort of larger contract caterers, and they're catering businesses, so they employ chefs, and they will have the catering contract within a number of different sites and operations. So usually these are within non-food and drink businesses, i.e., for instance, going back to the example of The Office, PwC are not in the business of employing chefs. They don't want to manage chefs on their P&L. So they will work specifically with a contract caterer, and a contract caterer will have that contract with that office. These contract caterers then service into a wide part of the market. So if you're looking at the likes of Compass Group, they will have contracts with prisons. They will have contracts with schools. They will have contracts into business and industry, into leisure sites such as hotels and stadiums. So there's this massive sort of breakdown underneath that. So often when you get a listing with a contract caterer, again, there's a common misconception, which is we're listed with Compass Group, which if you can get on Compass Group's sort of listing platform, which is called Foodbuy, you have availability, for a number of sites, thousands of sites to order you. But again, it comes back to the same thing. You've just got to keep driving that in customer and being sort of very sort of clear in terms of sort of what channels you're targeting. Most challenger brands that listen to this podcast are not going to be appropriate for prisons, I imagine. I can't say that definitely, but I probably can make a pretty safe assumption. So you work on
Poby's pops would be.
And then just lastly, just in terms of covering all the bases, you then have food service providers, and the food service providers generally are providing food products, and generally food, so the likes of Breaks and Bid Foods, and Creed Food Service, and there's a number of others, but these are normally delivering larger quantities of food. So in the likes of islands, they will be delivering their chocolate powder, their flakes in sort of more industrial size pack sizes into their sort of coffee customers. But there's still very much opportunities within that space, because those businesses understand that they can still provide drinks within that. There's extensions within the ranges. So even with food service providers that are typically doing catering size sort of food products, you can still there's add-on opportunities to have drinks, of course, and the likes of Bid Food and Breaks and Creed Food Service have an array of sort of drinks offering that sort of complements their food offering. So yeah, I hope that's not a sort of too long answer, but it's quite a fragmented. So I suppose if you're coming into this industry with sort of with not that sort of prior understanding, you start to understand this is a very, very fragmented sort of market with multiple sort of different layers, and then underneath all that, to add complexities, within things like Compass Group and CH&Co, they then have different businesses underneath that, with different names that supply into different channels. So Compass has Levy that supplies into all of their leisure sites, for instance, and then they have their business and industry sites. So what I would probably having, and I've actually created, for anyone, if anyone wants to hit me up, I'm happy to share. I've created sort of more of a sort of a map of, and sort of mapped out lots of these sort of channels, who the key players are, who are the sort of subsidiaries below them, just because I think a visual representation of this and what channels they then sell into can be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like let's dig. We keep using this oil analogy. I think it's quite good. So let's dig deeper into the contract catering specifically, because I feel like it's almost like we've dug past the oil and we've entered a fucking brand new world. Like we've almost got into Atlantis, like the water world, and it's like so perplexing and confusing. And the way I've always heard about it, or to me, it's always perplexed me. It's like I feel like you can end up being a busy fool in that, because the amount of effort to get a Spotify listing, and there's bugger all volume there, which you could just spend. I don't know, you could spend that energy building D2C where there is volume, or you could spend that energy going into trying to get a co-op listing where there's 500 stores. But then at the same time, as soon as you get into that Atlantis underworld of out of home, there are these huge opportunities in, like, I don't know, for example, If you're a functional drinks brand in David Lloyd, that's suddenly 80 sites. But where it gets confusing is it could, not saying it would, but it could take, and maybe David Lloyd's a bad example because I know they change the menu very frequently, but it could take as much effort to get a single site like a Spotify, which is great for shouting about on LinkedIn, as it would a David Lloyd, as it would a school, which isn't great for LinkedIn. Imagine saying, I got into loads of primary schools. I mean, that's hardly going to, hardly bang the bong for that. Imagine, let's make this really dumb, right? So you get the contract catering listing. What are the first one or two you go for? Because I know Compass is really hard. Like, again, let's just say this is Popey's Pops. Who am I going for? First question. Second question, I get a listing. What are the first three things I do? Like, I'm sat there going, fuck, I know I've got this listing. What do I do? Boemi, our beloved sponsor, are helping build the fastest growing challenger food and drink brands. Look, if you're a small brand just starting out and you need your first indie stockist, your first 100 stockists to wholesale, Boemi are the platform to categorically speed that up. But if you're a big brand wanting to get bigger, Boemi are also insane. They make field sales marble smooth, silky slick. They're just epic. Ollie's been on this podcast twice, actually. They saw a 29% uplift in sales when using Boemi to check major malt listings availability. Insane. 29% uplift by downloading an app. Insane. Lucky Saint, my boy Aaron Duff, who's coming on this podcast in a couple of weeks, he uses it to manage a team of 30 people, and they've, Lucky Saint, have unlocked 500 draft listings by using Boemi. Look, you've got to get involved with this stuff. It's absolutely insane, and it will categorically change your life. It's just the sickest platform. I use it all the time at Islands. Hi guys, super quick one. So excited. Look, for years I've been badgering on about Hungry the podcast. You're probably bored to death. Thanks for putting up with me. But Hungry is also an agency, and we look after one amazing brand called Islands Chocolate. We've had a great time over the year. We've won listings at a load of wholesalers. We've won Milk and More. We've got our first grocery listing coming very soon, which is very sick. But what I'm thrilled to announce is Hungry is merging with HC Consulting. My boy Harry Clarke and his wonderful team, he's an absolute G. They do brand strategy, new business and account management. But why I really love working with Harry and why we've got on so well over the last couple of months is Harry was actually the founder of the boozy isolate brand Pops. So he's been in the trenches, he's grafted his face off, he's had the sleepless nights, he's had the turmoil, he's had the triumph, he knows what it is to be a founder, he is a founder. And he's got a proven track record in grocery and out of home. Holy moly dips, the gut stuff, Savile drinks, Remio gelato. So if you're a brand and you're stuck, you're looking for like new business help, you're looking to scale, drop us a message. We'd love to chat. Thank you so much. Back to the old episode.
So I think I think it's really easy. I think it's easier when I can bring some like relevant sort of brand examples into the picture, right? Because I think that helps everyone. So one of my first clients, which is a great brand that I worked with for a couple of years, called Unrooted Drink. So they're in the sort of shop space. They're doing well in that space, but they have a quite clear difference to MOJU, which is MOJU again. They have a 30-day shelf life in terms of their product, or I think it might be slightly longer, but it's essentially a fresh product, right? So they're slightly that limits them in terms of some of their sort of distribution, right? Because not all the time, but there are certain retailers and certain outlets that just require a longer shelf life. It's just a fact, right? So Unrooted, which is very much a challenger, it's a smaller brand than MOJU. They picked up pace in the supermarkets, but they had a very much a sort of focus, which was okay. Let's try and play in spaces which that might be more difficult for another fresher product, perhaps like MOJU, to sort of come into. So they for example focus massively into the travel space. So they focus really hard on travel, and they've focused on into hotels and minibars. So in terms of that example, it's that's an example where sort of a brand's looked at. Look, they're in a shop space, they're in a functional space. They've got a competitor within that space, but where can they not play, and where are those little nuances? And again, Shops for travel, they've done really well. They're on Virgin, they're on British Airways. Shops is actually a perfect place for, it's a quick boost of goodness. People have digestion issues sometimes on planes. They have a good gut shot health. There's a story to tell there. Again, same with the minibar scenario. People often in business hotels, for instance, we saw a lot of success focusing on business hotels. We have a good energy shop that sits there. The businessman's coming over from flying in. They're staying in the hotel for one night. They might have an espresso or coffee, but then they might take an energy shot from the fridge. So, and again, in terms of looking at sort of the rate of sale in a minibars is a big opportunity. But in terms of volume, if you can go into hotels with hundreds of rooms in, but the rate of sale is often small. This is in terms of like per room. So they're looking for a product like that. So again, I think looking at that example, it's again, that's a little bit of like tapping into, well, what are the operational sort of issues, all sort of dynamics within that category. And it's also looking, okay, you're sort of also doing a little bit of looking at your competitors and going, where can they play and where can they own and where can we own, and sort of making sort of a plan around that. I think that's answered one half of your question, but we can dive into probably the second half.
Yeah, no, but just to kind of play with that is, I think one of the things, and I do this a lot, is you can literally write on a piece of paper, it's like, what would this look like if it was easy? So because the world is so complex, people are obsessed with complexity. We lean on complexity as a crutch.
Sure.
For making, and we end up just faffing about basically. But what would this look like if it was easy? And I asked this, so getting the podcast going, what would this look like if it was easy? And he just boils away all the bollocks.
Yep.
And I think when you ask that as a brand, it's okay, what would this look like if it was easy? And you literally write this on a piece of paper, have your competitors, and it's like, what is hard for our competitors? Yeah. So when you do these two things, suddenly you find the slipstream channel. So with Unrooted, it's like, okay, what would this look like if it was easy? But we've got a much longer shelf life, which means we can play in places where longer shelf life is actually super advantageous. Yep. Airlines, hotels, fill in the blank. Yeah. What is hard for MOJU? Places where they don't have a short shelf life. Airlines, hotels, blah blah blah. So that's hard for MOJU. Grocery is probably pretty easy for MOJU because they've been up and running. Sure. So again, what you've done there, super shrewd, is like, oh, fuck it, we're not going to play in the grocery space just yet. We're gonna dial in on these contract caterers. Yeah, I think that's super valuable and super actionable for people listening to this. But then let's go into the, as I said, almost like Atlantis, the underworld of contract catering. So you've done this upstream strategy. I can't pronounce my words. Upstream strategy where you've been like, right, this is easy for us, hard for them. Mm-hmm. This is where we're going to play. Mm-hmm. That kind of boils away a lot of the whiff in terms of being a meandering, gallivanting fool. Yeah. To focus. So you've done that piece of work. Then what is the next step? And maybe we could talk about. Yeah. Do you pick off end sites? Do you look for the big ones with lots of sites? How do you do it, mate? It seems so confusing to me. Yeah.
So I think, look, one of the hardest things like all this is actually understanding who their customers are. So, understanding who the customers are. So, this gets.
Sorry to interrupt. So to interrupt. So when you say customers, are you talking about, say the wholesaler's customer? So would you say the wholesaler is, I don't know, I'm just saying X. Yeah. When you say customer, are you talking about David Lloyd as the customer, or are you talking about the consumer, which is the person in the gym? Because I always get confused.
Sorry, I should have clarified. So in terms of the account, so the David Lloyd, the account that you're going to be selling to, not the consumer who's going to consume the product. Often these wholesalers or contract caterers can be quite cagey with their accounts. So what that really requires you to do is to try and look, this is a relationship building exercise, which is you have to try and get to know in the contract caterers your lead contact from Compass, and then underneath your buyer they will have they will have business development managers that look after different sectors, and there's a game of being able to sort of try and build relationship with them. You know, they will, if they're kind, share lists with you. You know, this startup industry is, I do find, is sort of relatively sort of sharing and caring. So, you know, you might be able to sort of get some contacts from any other sort of people that you might know in the industry. And I think what you've just got to, when you're targeting these, and when you're targeting these sort of sales accounts, you've got to be, I think you've got to be very, very, very quickly, because like I keep saying, is when you're looking at these out of home categories, you know, it's addressing the pain point, it's addressing the gap. So, you know, immediately you've got to try and find your space within that. You've got to, you know, you can't just be another of another. You've really got to give them a reason why your product sort of needs to be in that environment. So I think, yeah, there's quite a, you know, and these contract cages are pretty good. You know, they often do days when they invite lots of their accounts down. You know, you have larger sampling days. You know, they can be sort of collaborative, but I think it goes with. I think this sort of goes back to the point, which is looking at this difference between this out of home and this sort of grocery bit. And I think this is where lots of people, you know, think, oh, we email one buyer, it's the bar Waitrose, we get the listing, happy days, you know. And there's this huge, this out of home piece. There's a lot of hard graft, and there's a lot of boots on the ground, and there's a lot that goes into it. But you know, as you sort of mentioned, Dan, before, it can really, it can also what it can also do is really help create your brand identity, what you stand for. You know, it does so much more. And to go back to this sort of example, which I think I didn't actually finish the question earlier, but you know, with Savile Beverage Co, we've just won a listing in Sainsbury's, which launches in 2 weeks' time. And we actually had a call with the buyer the other day. And, he said to us, and I noted that down straight. He said, what you've been doing in the out of home channels has really has influenced my decision, seeing all that great work that you've done. And I did put a little sort of caveat there to speak to my client, who's the founder, which is saying, look, the volume might not be extraordinary, but what we've done is we've sold a story into a retailer that's unlocked something that is very, very big. And that's a little bit, and in that case, we're in all the premium offices down in the city, Canary Wharf, we're in David Lloyd, we're in all these places. And what it also does is if you are trying to unlock those listings with those supermarkets, it gives them, you can do the positive conditioning. You've always got something exciting to say. We've unlocked this, we've done this. It gives you all that. It gives you a lot to sort of talk about.
It sounds very crass, and I know it's a wanky phrase, but it's like it's the whole piece of, some people, an Excel nerd would look at it and be like, well, look, how many slices of margin are we giving away? Like, we sell into the customer, we sell into the distributor, then the customer, then the consumer. It's like, how much margin have we got left? It's like, that's a very reductionist way of looking at things. If you reframe that and say, well, this is actually our marketing budget. This is those slices and slithers of margin we're giving away is actually marketing spend, because again, I said the crass wanky phrase is your marketing is your distribution. It's like, you go into Selfridges, it's fuck all volume, but you're in Selfridges, it's a beacon account, or however you want to say it.
Yep.
The same with out of home, is it's like, we talked to, I interviewed Jeremy Torres who's the founder of Union Coffee.
Yeah.
Sick brand. They've been around for like 20 to 30 years. They basically solely focus on out of home for ages. They've only just began to dip their toes into grocery. And he was saying to me, he was like, look, well, if we're in these right places, that is our marketing.
Yeah.
That is, it's commercial. Mark Palmer calls it commercial marketing, which I love. It's like, it's the hybrid of sales and marketing. You get some volume, but you also get the marketing return.
Yeah.
And I think that simple reframe is like, why is out of home because I mean, I dismiss it as like that's not a ball ache. Just focus on D2C and grocery. But it does make sense.
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of that margin piece.
Yeah,
so I was just going to say, because let's talk about the margins, because I think what again, it's case by case. Everything's case by case, and there's a lot of nuance. But what are the minimum margins you need, gross margin, so that when you to actually not even necessarily make money, but break even and make sure that story you're selling to the retailer is actually profitable? Because it's all well and good having all these accounts, but if you're making fuck all out of it, what's the point? Do you know what I mean?
True, and I think that often is a challenge in terms of dealing with. It's a sort of it's sort of this reality that is sort of a painful reality for startup brands, which is to build distribution, you normally have to work with a wholesaler or a sort of distribution partner. Those distribution partners now want somewhere between 22 and 28% gross profit. So they will basically you'll be selling to them, let's say £1 for as a simple argument. They will be adding 22 to 28% on top of that to that, and that will be their margin. And then the retailer's going to be wanting to take, depending on what channel you're selling it into. An on-trade customer, might be looking at sort of 60-70% margin on top, and those restaurant partners and on-trade have different margins, but there's quite a lot of margin to give there. In terms of a sort of profitable channel, like any, I suppose, the other way to also look at it in some of these on-trade channels, and out-of-home channels, you expect to pay more for, if you're going out to a restaurant, you expect to pay more for a drink than you do in Tesco's, right? That's sort of that's just, everyone knows that. So there's definitely some sort of optimizing of your sort of commercial value chain. So your sort of cost price into that, where you can try and claw back your own margin off the back of the product being sold at a higher price. So most brands will sort of try and do that, but ultimately, there's cost. But I think ultimately, the reality of operating a brand in this market is there's cost. In every channel there is costs, and I think one of the things that particularly beverage brands coming into market, and when we talk about sort of canned beverage products, so normally in 250 ml or 330 ml sort of aluminium cans, or even bottles, your early stage production runs that you're doing, which might be 1,000 to 5,000 liters, they're very expensive. You're normally not going to be dealing with printed cans. So once you move over to, you'll probably have a can wrap rather than it being a printed can. So, it can be a painful, it can be quite a sort of painful experience. So sort of first trading years, but, the one thing that the drinks category really can, once you get to scale, usually depending on the ingredients that you're using within your product, once you can optimize your manufacturing, which is essentially moving to, you're buying your cans printed, which brings down the cost significantly, plus moving to a slightly larger, the next stage on for your sort of early stage bottlers to your sort of larger commercial bottlers, you're capturing a significant amount of margin. So, there will be founders in this sort of space who are going to be thinking, oh my gosh, margins are really tight, but they should have a pathway. So looking, okay, well, look, if we can get to the station, we can move to, we can recapture that margin. So that's sort of, I suppose, just the evolution of the journey.
Oh my God, I am so excited. It feels like Hungary is finally swimming in the big leagues. I can't believe this. It's absolutely mental. But delighted to announce that Big Fish, yes, Big Fish, are partnering with the podcast. Perry's been on the podcast 3 times. Listeners absolutely love it. Some of our most downloaded and cherished episodes of all time. But Big Fish are behind literally so many brands in your cupboard, in your weekly shop. Charlie Bigham, Year Valley, Tyrrell's, Clipper Tea, Goo, Rana. I mean, mate, the list is longer than the River Nile. but they also share risk and invest in brands that they really believe are a force for good. They're brands that they believe are going to be the next big thing, like Howder, the snack that gives back. But even more exciting news, Big Fish want to speak to the next wave of small challenger food and drink brands that are destined for big things, the racconteurs, the movers, shakers, buccaneering visionaries. So look, if you want to speak to Big Fish and just have a chat, get your brand in front of them, then drop me a message. My mate Louis from Local Beer, Amazing Beer, was in their office, aka La Fish Bowl, last week, chatting to Perry, Freddie and the Big Fish crew. So drop me a message if you would like to speak to them. Yeah, I've got you. So I love what you're saying there about, you know, the evolution, the journey and the pathway to scale. What I'd love to understand is how you create the brand. How do people stay in the game long enough to actually go on that journey to scale, where they go from the wrapped can? And I'd love to know, you know, with grocery, you have your kind of your gross margin. Giles Brooks says minimum 40% gross margin before, you know, because that will cover by the time you've taken away the cost of the promotions, the media spend, the sampling, blah 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 blah. With out of home specifically, what is the, for drinks, what is the, and again it's all case by case, but the minimum margin you would be happy going in with, so that everyone gets their slither? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So look, I think there's you know, going back to the Giles Brooks analogy of, you know, that sort of, you know, 40%, you know, you're probably realistically, like, after you're investing in promotions and trade marketing and grocery, you know, that margin's probably sitting somewhere in the 30s, right? So, you know, between that 30 and 40% margin, you've got sort of enough sort of oxygen in the tank to sort of, you know, as an early stage business, I think dropping below that is, you know, once you've got your operating costs, it's going to be a difficult, you know, it's you know, in terms of trading profitably, it's going to be difficult. I know that's not the ambition of every brand at the beginning, but I'd go back and say, you know, in terms of margins, you know, every business is slightly different, but I would agree with, you know, that sort of 30 to 40% margin is sort of somewhere in between. That is sort of a typical sort of place where an early stage brand might want to be. You know, we are normally dealing with brands that are dictating a higher price point. So, you know, these sort of healthier beverage brands in the market are dictating a £2.50 price point. So, you know, in terms of the value chain, they've got, you know, there's going to be cost more to produce, but they're also dictating a higher price point, right? So just in terms of how that looks across the value chain, they're capturing market. But what I will also say is, with, you know, the out of home channel, you know, people, this is why I love it, and it's quite exciting, because you can, you know, as you sort of, we talked about earlier, you know, I 100% believe, you know, these out of home channels and trading and all these amazing different channels, whether that be in a 5-star hotel, whether that be in, you know, a sort of just a sort of you know, a sort of run as you mill sort of you know, pub or whatever it is, they all tell a different story, and they all do something different for your brand. So brands can look at it slightly different. There might be a customer that you love so much that you're willing to take a small margin on it, but actually it's not going to affect your business so much, because it might be just a slither.
Yes.
Whereas if you're working with a supermarket, like, that margin protection has to be so much greater, because, you know, there's you know, 6 supermarkets in the UK that you want to work with. They're all going to be significant revenue. You've got to protect that. Or you might go with lots of brands. I'm sure I'd love to see the P&L of some of these challenger brands working with Soho House, but they're probably making no money at all, because everyone will, you know, drop their pants to work with Soho House. You know, excuse the pun, but you know, therefore, you know, they'll be investing, and they'll be doing this, and they'll doing that, and there'll be retros, and there'll be investments on top. But, you know, I'm not saying that's wrong. That might be because that's a beacon account. It's a halo. They can shout about it. It does something different to what necessarily, you know, Fuller's does, you know, or Green King, or some nationwide public than Soho House. They have a different role in the business, and it means something different in their mix. So that's almost sort of the fun of it.
But also, yeah, and that is the fun of it, is, and it's almost like you can move. I think what you said, the word I love there is story. Is each distribution point in out of home can be a very lucrative story in terms of brand building.
Yeah.
Annnndddd for Trip is, in terms of the credence and the gravitas and the people venerate Trip because it's in Annabelle's, like the most exclusive members bar or club, never been in, probably won't be allowed in. but the what that's done, and actually what you could actually think is okay, right, we're going to sell into I'm just putting things out my arse here, but like the Ritz, for example, and we're going to we'll slice away the margin, but then you could take 2 buyers there for dinner, and you're on the menu, and it looks amazing, and then so there's other ways you can see, and it goes back to this point: is out of home is your storytelling marketing vehicle plus commercial. I.e., you can make cash out of it, and I think that's super valuable.
And I think the age-old example of that is probably Fever Tree, who did it so well. I think their strategy was back in the day, 20 years ago, was we're going to get ourselves listed in the Michelin star restaurants, and that's all we're going to focus on for the first 2 years, and then come a couple of years later, waitress started knocking on their door. So it's again the on trade and these sort of prestige accounts. They are part of your marketing mix because Annabelle's has been, again, never been to Annabelle's, but they've spent millions of pounds promoting themselves or establishing themselves as the most exclusive members club in the UK or the world. Therefore, just having that association to them just tells a story about your brand. It helps.
We'll do the next supper club there, mate.
Yeah, it defines quality and expectation, all those things. So and I think that's I think that's why it's sort of an exciting, and let's just be very clear here, is that these are the places where people interact with your brand. These are the places where you can actually go in and sample. These are the places where you can actually gather live feedback. These are places where you can show up. And I think show up is a sort of is key within every brand, because you've got to start learning who your consumer is, what do they like, what do they hate, all those sorts of things. And firstly, you can't do that in a supermarket, and also you can't go into a supermarket without doing that first bit of work. So the usual pathway into that grocery, that sort of as you sort of described it on one of your podcasts, I think the Russell universities of sort of distribution points. Everyone sort of wants it, and it sort of looks lovely. But that this piece of work before is sort of fundamental, and so just to sort of go, and particularly for beverage brands, which I know is sort of the topic of today. I've worked with quite a lot of brands, and involved in some brands, that have successful grocery launches pretty much straight away. But they're all they're very rarely ever drinks brands. They are food brands. One. But also,
sorry to interrupt. But say this is the curve of a brand going from no one knows about you, challenger brand, to full scale household brand, right?
Yeah.
But let's talk about Green and Blacks as an example, or maybe another brand. So at this point in the curve, and for listeners, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see this, but I've got imagine a standard graph and the adoption curve. Google adoption curve and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But every brand starts here. And at this beginning point, you have the early adopters who are kind of evangelists of your brand. They're kind of the hippie, as kombucha for example, hippies, for example, hippies with hairy armpits, whatever. Stink of shit, but love kombucha, right? they maybe that's a bit of a generalization, but they're the ones who are talking about you. But at some point, you've got to go up this curve, and you need, and there's only so much grocery can do to help on that curve. At some point, you need to inject, and this happened with Manilife, right? So you have the early adopters, which is the Bailey and Sage, the Whole Foods, the Selfridges, the Harrods. You've got the middle class mums and young professionals who are buying your peanut butter. It's expensive. Then you get your Waitrose listing, your Sainsbury's listing, and you go further up this curve. You're trying to become a household brand. But at some point, you need to become even bigger, and you need to have this explosion of introduction to brand new shoppers introduction of new occasions and introduction of well, basically those two things.
Yeah.
What out of home can do, and this happened with us with Costa Coffee, is Costa Coffee coming along. They've got national distribution. They're not in areas that are traditionally where we were at this part of the adoption curve, i.e. like middle class. They're all over the country. They've got our mini pots on the menu. Suddenly Manny Life is introduced to a whole new delta of customers all up and down the country. So as much as we've been talking about out of home as this kind of this luscious storytelling kind of vista where people can really tell these stories to brands, as you go up the adoption curve, it can suddenly be an opportunity to just inject this wildfire of introduction to new customers. David Lloyd would be another example. Going from David Lloyd, you could then go into Pure Gym, which is almost a bit like your Costa Coffee. But there's only so far you can go with grocery and out of home. They dance together, that they're inextricably intertwined. And I think what I've learned from you is learning along the adoption curve how it interweaves in the brand building journey. In terms of those big, I don't know why I'm making that noise, but these I'm trying to signal like a grenade of awareness and an introduction to new customers. How does one go about that in out of home? Like, what would you say are those? Say a brand's slightly bigger. Say a brand is in all those listings I've just said. They've done the Selfridges, they've done the Whole Foods, they've done the Waitrose. It's selling well. Where do they go about finding a nuclear awareness bomb? If that's the best way of putting it.
Well, I think actually, so if you're going up that adoption curve, right, and normally it's that sort of shallow starting point, and then it's a little bit like escape ramp. It sort of rolls up, and you're sort of thinking, okay, cool. So I've got a business, and I'm in most distribution points in sort of grocery. I need to expand out of it. I think actually what we have seen, and actually, and I know we're sort of, let's talk about food a little bit, but I've seen that a lot. We've seen that successfully within sort of the food service sort of categories where now if you look at like casual dining as a sort of sector, so looking at the sort of Pizza Expresses, the ZZs, Arse, that sort of the restaurant group, those sorts of stuff. It's really interesting that you're now starting to see branded propositions on their menu, because they can now start to see that there's then that value piece, which is actually consumers. If you've got a brand that it has sort of it's got strong brand awareness, it's a premium brand, it's got that credibility in the market, it can sort of add value. So if you might have seen let's look at an example. So if you see some of the plant-based categories, they will have the branded products there, because those people, I'm not necessarily a consumer of those sorts of products, those sort of like those sort of like fake chicken products, but the consumers have an element of trust within those brands, those consumers who consume those products. Therefore, they've been featuring those products on the menu. We've seen that with the likes of Holy Moly Dips. We've done that with our sort of breakfast avocado. So there's lots of sort of other examples of that. In terms of porridge propositions, MoMA's been on menus in sort of large outlets. So you can start to see that's sort of the other way of doing it, which is actually you got that adoption curve. You then become quite an established brand with some premium proposition. You then some venture into sort of an element of sort of casual dining and sort of food service, but actually you turn it into a branded opportunity because your brand now because it's gone up that adoption curve, it's now got that brand, adds that brand value there. So you turn a food service opportunity into a branded opportunity, and that is actually quite powerful. And that is something that you now start to, and it's not because typically you just think actually you've got a food menu. They might talk about some. They talk about if in terms of where the meat or fish might be, if that's got some sort of provenance story. But actually, so there's provenance in there. And then drinks is drinks because it's all branded. But actually now what you're seeing is actually this sort of array of sort of like branded food stuff, which I think is really sort of exciting. But again, it's only in a certain. This comes back to what we were talking about, the difference between the sort of 5-star hotel versus the sort of the other something that might in terms of the drink scenario. But you're going to get that in casual dining, but you're not necessarily going to go to you're not going to go to the Wolseley or something like that, and they're going to start mentioning those brands in there. So there's a bit of a fine balance. But again, that's sort of starting to feel out what those operators are looking for, and which operators are right for you.
MoMA is the great example. They've sold the business. I think Tom, I've met him once or twice actually, but he sold the business. They've had huge distribution, but they've literally just done a deal with Gales to be the oat milk of choice. And there's loads of POS, rich storytelling. And again, that goes back to another explosion of awareness. Like just because you've got full distribution in grocery, you need to drive penetration. How do you drive penetration? Well, tapping into these out-of-home food service, fill in the blank outlets. Again, another example could be like how many people you may have grocery distribution, but have you tapped into the airlines where how many fuckers are flying on planes all the time? Do you see what I mean? I think that's really valuable.
Yeah.
A few more things, and let's wrap this up. But I think this is epic, mate. And it's just, I'm learning a lot about out of home, and just the nuances of it. But the other thing, I've been doing this. I've been in FMCG for 8 years now.
Yep.
So, and I've noticed a few things, specifically in drinks. So when I started 2016, 2017, cold pressed juices were all the rage. And then that kind of petered out. You had brands like, I think Press is still going. I think Press is smashing it in D2C.
Yep.
But then these other brands, they kind of fall at the wayside.
Yep.
Shots was a massive movement. You've now got gut health as a huge movement, which is kind of the next wave. At one point, you had cold brew coffee as a kind of RTD cold brew coffee that loads of brands came and went.
Yeah.
What do founders need to be focusing on because it's such a huge golden El Dorado-esque opportunity? Loads of people pile in, like people are piling in like fuck to this functional drinks category. I know loads of founders. Those are my mates got brands doing it.
Yeah, that prebiotics.
Kombucha is another example.
Yeah,
prebiotics, probiotics, dobiotics, whatever. What do they have to focus on to make sure they're still around in 10 years' time when the hype kind of dissipates?
Look, I think some of the, this is probably just the reality of the game to a degree, and there's no point sort of dancing around it. To win in drinks, often, not all the time, is there's an element of cash requirement, right? That more so than much more so than other categories, because in terms of just getting that sort of penetration, there's just an element here of an awareness piece, and obviously,
Sorry to interrupt. But so just for listeners, just define penetration.
Yes, it's
not like that, but like penetration.
No, so look, like we just sort of break it down. There's I suppose there's two. Yeah. So in terms of penetration, I'm meaning just in terms of breaking into the market, right? So and then capturing a market share. So for instance, if you're let's say within a let's say the CBD category, right? It's the CBD category. First, really sort of probably came to the UK, 7-8 years ago. Now there was probably 100 players in that space. There's now only, that might actually be a bit of that because they've had the novel foods and there's been some sort of like some nuances that are different. But it can very quickly go from a significant amount of brands to sort of 5, 6, or just sort of much smaller percentage of what was there. And sometimes that is just that's a degree of, obviously the brand needs to be executed properly. Obviously the product needs to taste good. But once, for instance, you get distribution, it's a case of, okay, we need to try and get as much market share as quickly as possible. because and I'd say this in terms of more trend focused categories, or when I say trend focused, in terms of new categories that have come, that might have new benefits. So for instance, as we sort of discussed, maybe CBD 7 years ago, kombucha, when it first came to the market, there's these breakaway brands who have sort of executed their proposition really well. They've captured market share, and then they've sort of just grown within that. So I think there's a level here where you need to start thinking, and I think you just got to rule up to it. If you want to be a market leading brand, okay, so let's look at this prebiotic soda. I'm seeing prebiotic soda coming to market. I think there's been Lollipop and Olipop. I can't remember in the US now. Everyone sort of, all the products look quite similar flavor profiles. They've seen that come in, right? And I know there's some great founders between some of these brands, but there's going to be a speed to market bit, which is some of these people are going to capture market quicker, and then they're going to grow that market share quicker, right? That requirement is an element of speed, and a combination of like speed, execution, and and also cash requirement to break into that space. And I think where because obviously when you're an emerging category, where you want to get to is saying we have X%. I've read some great statistics about Trip, for instance. They have X amount of the CBD category, so that sort of ownership there. So yeah, I think that's a sort of I think and I feel a bit bad saying it's not cash is king, but there's I think founders would know, if you're going into one of these categories like the prebiotic soda, which now has loads of players, if you think you're going to go into that category, bootstrap it, try and just build your revenue slowly. Like, I'll tell you now, you're not going to win. There's going to be people ahead of you on that. So,
right.
Think about that. But whereas just to sort of flip the coin slightly on that, I love the example of, I think it's, probably quote you again, but, looking at some of these brands in the market, like if you look at, these are like trend, I say trend, these are sort of these new functional categories that are emerging, right? Yeah. So like these ones where, there's new brands coming into the market and they're all about capturing market share, and there's that space. So looking at these functional beverages, you've got the other side of the coin, which is, in the drinks category, you've got the likes of, Corsten Press, which I know, the team really well. They've been trading for 15, 20 years. They've been growing up that curve slightly more, more organically. They've had that sort of nice adoption sort of curve. And, they're a brand that I sort of look at now with great respect, because they're sort of 15 years into their journey. They haven't necessarily been the skyrocketed brand that's gone to the universe, but they've built up a really loyal customer base in grocery out of home. And I'm not sure how that business looks commercially, but it's they've taken it that way. But why I think that sort of works, so some of these brands that are coming into what I would say, like premium soft drinks, which don't necessarily have the sort of functional benefits, but they're sort of so the likes of Corson, Dalston, Punchy, those sort of drinks.
Founders can get so blown by the trend wins, whether it's kombucha or juices or functional drinks or fill in the blank. Over the next 20 years, there's going to be way more trends coming in and going. Yeah. The only thing that will buck every single fucking trend is taste. Yeah. You could get 10 brands and get them all to raise £10 million. Yeah. The one that will be around here in whether it's functional kombucha, X, Y, Z, is the one that tastes the best. And this is what I interviewed William Kendall, who's the founder of Corson Press, spoken to Mark numerous times. They're like, the reason they're winning is because yes, there's all these trends. And I think there's some amazing brands, and I think some of them taste amazing. Like Living Things tastes great. Freya's brand tastes amazing. Vibe, as she says, there's some amazing brands out there that taste absolutely banging. But the ones that taste the best, I think we can get so flustered by all this convoluted trends, hypes, and actually it neglects us from focusing on the taste. Sure. And if it tastes really good, taste is the trend that's never going to go away.
Yeah.
Like, we still buy Coca-Cola. It's so unhealthy. It bucks every trend because it tastes unreal.
Yeah.
Like, these big brands are around for so long because they taste amazing.
And I think ultimately where, there's elements where, where refreshment is the key, especially within drinks, where refreshment is key, taste is taste first, functionality second, right? Because, when you've got that, you're sitting in that refreshment phase, it's a hot day, you just want something that tastes delicious. The slightly, if you are really a sort of super healthy proposition, there's an element here where there's a psychological, probably Rory Sutherland's got a great way of sort of that, where actually it shouldn't be sort of unbelievably delicious, because some way we will sort of think it's not as healthy. But I think in the wider sort of what we're sort of talking about here, in terms of, looking even at these sort of still, even if it's a kombucha brand, people want taste. Taste is, taste in terms of is the number one deliverable, and then sort of strong functionality afterwards in that space.
Yeah, and I think you're so right. It's like if Huel tasted like a GBK milkshake, you'd be a bit these are snake oil salesmen. The fact it tastes slightly kind of off a little bit makes me think, oh, this is great for me. Do you know what I mean? This is my nutritionally complete shake. I think final thing to wrap up on, makes. I think this is, as always, this is where I kind of wanted to work with you, because I think you've got just so much experience, and you've just, because you've worked with so many brands, you've really managed to kind of just get a holistic view of how these things work. Just to end with, like, say there's a drinks brand listening to this, they're kind of planning out the first part of the year. I mean, we'll try and get this to go live in a couple of weeks, early Feb. What are some of the questions they should be constantly asking themselves to kind of to get through the next kind of year or so? Is it, for example, how are we activating X wholesaler? Is it, let's not sell in unless we hit this margin? Because I think the answer lies in the question. And I think people, if they ask themselves great questions, they elicit themselves great answers allow them to stay in the game.
Yeah, I think look, from my perspective, I think looking at sort of the category, I'd be looking at a lot longer. So, I look at, if I haven't launched a brand again, but I'm looking at sort of a longer time frame. So, how does this look in sort of, 10, 20 years? Look at that sort of Corsten press kind of analogy. I'd look at that. I'd take that time frame and extend it out. That's one thing I'd do. I'm not against trends, like, not at all, but, I would have my trend radar on me, like a real, like, flashing all the time. Where is this? Is this something that's going to be around in 2 years, 3 years? I would also, I do think I would be thinking also about the barriers to entry. So, developing a drink, even a healthy functional, there's some great developers out there, relatively low cost, so I would be thinking around how quick can this product be copied? And if so, how quickly? And therefore, if someone does that and then might have more money or might have more, how does that? And I think there's an element here where, Huel's a great example as a complex product, as a drink, it's serving something else, but there's complexity into that product. So I think in terms of an industry where there's lots of players coming in, there's lots of innovation, I'd be sort of, maybe those three things would be my the three things I'd be thinking of, sort of, time in the market to execute, making sure this isn't a flash in the pan trend, and if you've got some ownability over some IP in terms of product, or there's an element of know-how in terms of the craft that can protect you. I think that definitely are things that I would be thinking about as a founder.
Mate, been an absolute delight as always. Yeah, look forward to seeing you when I'm back in Blighty. And thanks so much for that. Really appreciate it, brother.
No worries. Thanks so much, mate.